All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Greetings from the Garden State. I'm your host, Mike Cam. We are in our third now episode of our New Jersey Veteran Series. So obviously we have our excellent co-host, Bill Anthony's with us for this episode as well. Bill, welcome back to the show. Episode 3 for you right now. I forget how many episodes.
I mean, it's so many. It's tough to keep track.
No, this is 4 because this is the second one of today, and you've already been on 2 others, so it is 4. That I just got like all messed up. Who's counting?
But it's the most.
I am. I got like a little tally over here. You guys got made it to the top of the list. But so this is episode 3 of our veteran series that we're working on for the month of November. This is another episode that we're going to drop on Veterans Day, November 11th, as part of kind of, bringing awareness to different things like this. So this is another vet that you introduced me to. So I'll let you kind of do a little lead in about how you know him, and then a little bit of like kind of his background, and then we'll introduce him.
Yeah. Vince and I met probably about 5 years ago now, maybe a little bit more. Don't know the years. Doesn't really matter. We met actually at a CrossFit seminar, and then spent more intimate time out in Colorado at a veterans event. And then Vince did a Between the Ears event, all within the span of like, I want to say maybe like 3 or 4 months. It was kind of like a back-to-back situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, Army veteran, New Jersey native, hell of a story, been, a friend and really just just somebody we've had the good fortune of getting to know him and his wife, and they're doing some awesome things down South Jersey, and has a story to say. So I'll let Vince obviously talk about Vince, but yeah, man, good to see you.
Yeah, you too, Bill. Man, that is all true. It happened really fast because Bill was teaching at the CrossFit level 1 seminar at that time. And the minute he gets up there and he starts doing his thing, I'm like, this dude was definitely in the military, right? Like without a doubt, right? He's deadly serious about the task at hand, but there's like a light degree of humor, right? Like we're not curing cancer or trying to do something that inherently dangerous necessarily, right? And so good experience, but no connection necessarily. Like he's busy doing what he's doing, and hey, this is Between the Ears, kind of my thing. The Flowmaster plugged what he was doing. So immediately I pick up my cell phone and look it up. And I love the story. It was like a tree and a sunrise and a sunset. And I'm like, yeah, no interest. Like I put it down immediately. Right. And, but like Bill stated, I saw him at the veterans, like it was like a leadership expedition / retreat. And close some space there. And the one thing I like to share about that weekend is, I was already starting my work, and I currently work as a mental health professional, right? I have a private practice here in South Jersey. And at that time I had started, I was doing the work, and he kind of called me on some BS. And I made a statement to the effect of like, hey, sometimes when I'm dealing with clients, or I'm coaching CrossFit, or dealing with people, whatever it is, I kind of ask, how's that working out for you? Right. And I clearly remember him pushing back and challenging that. And he made a bold statement to a stranger, right? Like, hey, dude, that sounds really condescending, or at least I would take it that way. And it's kind of interesting in that friction point around a campfire on the side of a mountain. We don't know each other. I think it was a good way to kind of establish credibility, establish a degree of respect long before we got to trust or mentorship or anything like that. Because following on because of that week, I sought Bill's coaching, right? My life had shifted and created a new trajectory based on some previous experiences, and Bill complimented that, and he kind of gave me the little the push to kind of accelerate some things and be a little more aggressive with my goals, my ambitions, and to what degree I can help other people. So grateful for the friendship, mentorship, and the coaching, all combined into one. I'm always a better human because of my relationship with Bill.
I love that. There was no question in there, and that was the best answer we've gotten in this entire series of the show, or this entire lifespan of the show. So this is gonna be a great episode. I could already tell off the bat. So just so everyone is aware, and the people that have been listening to this series consistently, which is only 3 episodes so far, but no, we're gonna kind of do like pre-military life during the military, and then post-military life, and try to follow that trajectory over the course of this episode over the next 45 minutes or so. So Bill had mentioned born and raised in Jersey, and South Jersey most of your life. Is that?
Yes. Yeah. So I was born in Staten Island originally,
Okay.
and we ended up in South Jersey. I was about 5 years old, so I don't have any formative memories necessarily of Staten Island. And I was raised between Lakewood and Bricktown, so Northern Ocean County. Yeah, that was my geographic orientation.
Yeah. So take me through a little bit of kind of like early life growing up. So, things that you were doing, activities that you were taking part in, if there was like a family dynamic that was, kind of formative in the military type thing, like different things like that, maybe to kind of like flesh you out as an early human.
Yeah, so I think the seeds get planted early for all of us with everything, right? And the fancy term is sublimation, right? We're kind of doing things as a kid, we just don't know that we're leading ourselves that way. And um, in terms of the military, I mean, my great grandfather served in World War One. I never met him. Both of my grandfathers in World War Two, all their siblings. That's not uncommon necessarily. But I looked up to them, right? And my paternal grandfather is my namesake. But I was very fortunate. I had a relationship with all of them. My uncles fought in Vietnam. My dad missed the draft because of a blown out knee playing basketball in Spanish Harlem as a kid. So with that being stated, my uncle, my godfather, he was in the 173rd Airborne Brigade. He was an airborne infantryman. He was involved in all of the big battles they faced, right? Like being surrounded by 6,000 NVA. He was in dead smack in the middle of that with him and his friends, right? And not until recently did we actually talk about that, which is really, really, I mean, humbled, right? He's still alive to have that conversation and share what he recalls when he was from 19, 20 years old. And I could share what my experiences were. And then my other uncle, he was an aviator. He was a Naval Academy grad. And, he's very candid about his experiences. He's like, I didn't see much of anything. I was way up in the sky doing what I was doing. And he did multiple tours in Vietnam as well. So, yes, sublimation. Cousin served as well. My brother was a Marine, enlisted in the Marine Corps. And for me, those are the guys I looked up to. But the why I say sublimation is important, right? My grandmother bought me like an Uzi that like was like a pop gun, right? And so I'm running around the neighborhood in the house, right? Then back in the day, they had the little like soldiers with little parachutes you could tie to them. She gives me those, right? And I'm throwing them out of the window, right? And like they're flying down to the ground, right? So those are all real things. And then what do I gravitate to naturally? Historical perspectives of combat and armed conflict. I think they informed how I looked at the world. I was never particularly a great student unless I took an interest to it. It was more of like, hey, gonna get through school. And competitive, right? That is one thing I think my parents got right is they encouraged us to play sports for however difficult my childhood was at any time, because my father at times had struggles, and it created some instability in our lives, right? With alcohol or whatever that was, right? And it wasn't necessarily him being absent or neglectful. He wasn't necessarily abusive. He was working hard to do what he did, but part of his pattern was come home after a long day's work and tie one on and then do it again and then do it again. So there was food in the fridge, the rent was paid, but as a result of lack of supervision and me being in an environment that at times could be combustible in Lakewood at that time, kids wander into things in their environment. And that's what I kind of did. I found the street, right? And so I was privy to that world long before I went into the military. And we'll get to kind of what happened towards the end of my military career and post-service. But yeah, baseball and ice hockey stuck. And I heard you say you played at TCNJ and you stated, hey, the East Coast or New Jersey has a style of baseball, right? And I would agree with that. I played AAU. I traveled all over the place, right? Like kids from the boroughs that played in New York City, they have a particular way of playing. Kids from the Philadelphia area play a certain way. Floridian kids play a certain way. Texas plays a certain way. California plays a certain way. I say that to say this is that New Jersey, in my estimation, when it comes to baseball specifically and all sports, is a hotbed, right? Is like, how is it possible that so many great teams and athletes and individuals could be drafted out of this Northeast state? And I think that speaks to the talent and the population density in New Jersey. Played through high school and super, super competitive in the A South at Brick High School. And then hockey kind of became the sticking point, and that's where I kind of excelled. And the group I played with, we were the last public school to win the overall state championship in 1998. And it's kind of a little like Al Bundy moment, but like me and my buddies to this day are incredibly proud of beating Seton Hall Prep in the overall state championship in ice hockey, because at the end of the day, that's a private school, right? And they can pick choose. And that's one of those crowning moments in my young athletic achievement. And then I played collegiately for a little while, played really, really well, Division III. Hockey's funny, right? Like I was a 17 turned 18-year-old freshman. Hockey, most freshmen are typically 19, 20 and or 21 because they play juniors out west or they play prep school in New England. My parents had no idea. And I just wanted to go hang out, right? But unfortunately, without me really knowing it, I had a raging alcohol problem at that point. I had no interest in going to school. I just wanted to play hockey and hang out. So it probably would have been better served for me to go out west and play junior hockey. That's probably where I belonged. But it wasn't a thing. My parents didn't know, and to no fault of their own. I had a great experience. And I'll share a plug about growth, and we're going to get into some of that stuff and change, right? Derek Lalonde at that time, he won a Stanley Cup coaching the Lightning in the NHL, right? So pretty high level of hockey. This guy knows some stuff about ice hockey, and he said to me as I was leaving school because my grades supported that decision. He said, "Hey, he's like, if you ever like grow up and become emotionally mature, you would be really good at this game." So there's one of the first seeds that were planted in me from somebody outside of my family or immediate system to say, hey, dude, you could be a hell of a lot more than you are right now. But again, emotionally immature, raging alcohol problem, and really identity issues, trauma history not resolved at that point. So 9/11 happens, and then I decide to volunteer to serve in the Army with myself and a few 100,000 of our neighbors throughout the country. I wasn't the only one. Apparently, there were a bunch of guys and gals that made the same decision.
Yeah. Around how old are you at that point?
I just turned 21.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, so was that something, I mean, obviously, like you said, 9/11 was obviously like a big shifter, which I feel like in the last, all 3 episodes so far, that's been like the common thread with all 3 of the guys we've had on. But had that ever been something that had crossed your mind in particular prior to 9/11, that like maybe this is something that a path I would go down? Or was it kind of searching for something, and then obviously like this monumental moment happens and it's like, okay, this could be something that could work for me?
Well, it's like I stated before. I think early on as a kid, it was always there. The seed was planted, right?
Yeah.
And because of the men I was around and my interest in that particular thing, like whatever I thought combat would be or the military would be, right? And it was all wrong, by the way. I found out later on. Yeah, 9/11 happens, and that was a violating feeling. I think geographic orientation, being from New Jersey, right?
Yep.
And then, if we didn't personally know somebody that was killed in the towers, we were one breath away from somebody, right? And we saw the devastation that created. I say we collectively because we're all from New Jersey, right? And I include myself in that, in the sense like the faces of neighbors, because their loved one is no longer with us, it left a visceral thing for me. It kind of created that response of like a call to action. And in many ways, which is ironic, right? The trajectory I had at that point, it saved my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first time the Army saved my life. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So take me maybe through, so you decide you're going to go in, and take me through some of like the early days, kind of going through that process, and getting training and doing all that kind of thing. Like, was it everything you said before? You were wrong about a lot of things with the Army, I guess, or I had these preconceived notions of what it would be. But maybe just take me through like your early experiences in the Army and doing all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, okay, like I stated before, the trajectory of my life wasn't necessarily a good one at that moment, right? Because I had the mindset going from my youth into my adolescence into early adulthood that red lights are for the bad drivers and rules are for the dumb people, right? That's how I live my life, right? Unapologetically. And in some ways I do that still, right? But I have a little bit of a better moral compass with that decision-making process. So I end up in the Army, and I don't listen to any recommendations. So for example, my godfather pulls me aside and says like, hey, I disagree. I think enlisting is a mistake. I think you need to finish college and go as an officer, right? Number one, he knows he was enlisted. Number two, he says, hey, I would highly recommend, and he looks me right in the eyes, you want to go to Ranger Regiment, and then you want to try to get to Delta Force as fast as you possibly can, because if you're going to go do this business, that's how you want to do this business. My grandfather followed on and said, hey, you don't know how American you are until somebody tries to kill you for being an American, right? Now, mind you, he's a guy that would give stories, and he would never get the blood and guts, but he would say things like, every time I heard a Panzer tank when I was in the Battle of the Bulge, I would have shit myself, except I hadn't eaten in 3 days, so there was nothing to come out, right? That was his experience, and they would say those things. They dropped those gems and nuggets. So for me, I went into the military, and I chose civil affairs because it was the fastest way to get into the umbrella or the tree that I wanted to get into. And I didn't have the courage to do what Bill did and go in as an 18 X-ray. They had just opened that up in that window of time, right? I didn't have the courage because I was like, man, if I don't get selected or if I don't make it, all that fear-based thinking, then I'm going to end up cutting grass at Fort Bragg somewhere in the 82nd Airborne. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that was my imagination because I didn't know what I was getting into, right? And so I end up going into civil affairs. And what civil affairs essentially is, it comes out of the same schoolhouse at Fort Bragg, the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center. And you're supporting either building up a government or helping to overthrow a government, right? That's a short version. And so if you separate and you think about things, your Ranger Regiment guys are doing direct action. They're killing and capturing exclusively. That's what they do. They sears out airfields, reconnaissance, killer capture. Special Forces is a dynamic, and I'm sure Bill spoke to this, is that like there's a range of things that Special Forces do. And direct action is very much part of it as well. Civil affairs does unconventional warfare, foreign internal defense, host nation government development. However, we're not trained, and part of our mission set is to do direct action. But here's the irony. My first deployment in 2004, if you were to Google the raid on the Gold Mosque, that was conducted by 5th Special Forces Group. Those were the guys that my team worked with and supported. The vehicle that I'm driving is within the first 20 seconds of the video. You could see it as the tail end of that. We conducted rear security on that raid. That raid was absolutely one of the most remarkable and amazing things I did because they were some of the most remarkable and amazing soldiers I've ever been around. So that is to share with you is like those are my formative years and experiences in the military, and those are some of the things that shaped my worldview very quickly.
Yeah. Okay, so that's something that's early on. I mean, that's pretty intense. Definitely. I mean, I would imagine because this is not my background. But so how long total were you in the military?
12 years.
Okay, so over the course of that career in the military doing different things like that, did you start to become aware of maybe things that, like you were saying before, like you were aware now of things that you were struggling with prior to joining the military, but did you see those things manifesting themselves in yourself during your career in the military, or did you start to see like kind of like a shift in your personality, personal self, all that kind of stuff over that 12-year span?
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? After that first deployment, I come back in 2004, and my mother and father would tell anyone that, like, hey, I remember my father told my mom, like, hey, your son's different, like, it's just different. Some things are different now. But the reality is like it had brought up some stuff to the surface, and it all falls within that trauma tree of safety and security, trust, power and control, esteem, and intimacy, right? Like, I couldn't discern friend or foe at that point unless I was around guys I served with, right? And that's like the first red flag, is because I'm seeking places of people with similar experiences exclusively, and I'm shutting down and closing off from the world. Yet I don't necessarily know that's what I'm doing. I'm looking back 2020 hindsight. So what does that mean is like, well, I just accelerated the process and sought more deployments and more training, and that's what I did. So 2005, I go to Africa. That was an incredible experience. Saw another side of the business. And I say the business because war is 100% of business in my experience. And then in 2008, I went to Iraq. I was involved in the siege at Sadr City. And again, these big battles and these things I ended up in weren't because of Vince. It was kind of like where I lined up on the roster that day. They plug and played me to be and support whatever team I was with to do the mission, right? And then in 2010, I worked in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. I was all over that province, supporting a bunch of different entities and elements. What's interesting with Kunar Province, that deployment was extremely difficult, and it kind of brought things full circle based on, at that point in my career, I was in a leadership position, and young people were very dependent upon this 29-year-old person, right? And that was very much still emotionally immature, yet kind of just good at doing combat and war, right? Whatever that means. And that particular province is very violent, and it's a documented history, and there's a reason it is the battle space where the most Medal of Honors have been awarded for actions in the operating environment. It's simply because it is a very, very difficult enemy in very, very difficult terrain. And history has shown that, very unforgiving. So by the time I got to that third deployment, I would submit to anybody is that my rubber band had broke. And here's the thing in my experience in the military, whether somebody's an administrative person, whether somebody is a special missions unit guy, there is a limitation to how much combat anyone can do. We all have a rubber band. No matter how well trained you are, no matter what the circumstances or the conditions, there does come a point that that rubber band can get stretched too far and can potentially snap. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody has the same thickness or tension that the rubber band can withstand, but you expose yourself to enough situations where you believe and you confirm that you were in threat of peril, or alternatively, you're conspiring to kill people, that is going to shift your worldview. And I say you, meaning making a generalization. There's no humans I know that can experience direct combat and come back the same from that. I just don't see how that's possible. And I say that now doing what I do in therapy, as in my practice, working with veterans and other folks that have been through similar circumstances. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me because it's like kind of going through this, and it's like this you had this structure, so there was like a structure piece to it, so it kind of like keeps you on a track, whatever the track that may be, but then also like not necessarily, like I think you were saying, and not to put words in your mouth, but like not focusing on the stuff that you needed to, like, kind of, you said emotionally immature even at 29, but in a leadership position, so just constantly trying to like fill that hole with like more stuff, and constantly kind of like working on that. And then when you had mentioned that the rubber band had snapped, is that around the time that you were like, that you got out? Is that no?
No, so I get back and then I end up being designated as a training sergeant, right? So what does that mean? Essentially, I manage the training schedule administratively, making sure all the beans and bullets are going where they need to go so people can get trained, and then making sure all the enlisted soldiers are getting their schooling, right? Like there's certain education requirements for every promotion or time of service, and that was kind of my job. I essentially hated it, and looking back on it, back to that maturity thing, if I was smart enough, I knew something was wrong and I wasn't okay. My ex-wife would have said that as well. She had left me at that point, to no fault of her own. She did the right thing to protect her and my daughter. I ultimately, when it comes down to it, I just didn't have the courage to raise my hand to be like, hey, I'm having some intrusive thoughts, and I'm drinking way too much, right? And flash forward a little after that deployment, I found IV heroin use, because I met the right or the wrong person, depending on how you tell the story. And what I found out really quickly is that opioids work. It's like a warm hug, right? And a shot of dope did exactly that. And so, not to segue too much, right? We're in New Jersey, right? We're in the belly of the beast when it comes to that, in my estimation, pandemic, right? Yeah. That is plaguing our society and community. And I was very much complicit in that. So, mind you, my life escalates. I have a raging alcohol problem, struggling with post-traumatic stress. I'm dealing with suicidal and homicidal ideation at times, which is drug induced. But I also have a propensity for violence. And now I'm running around Camden and Philadelphia, right? So it was a very combustible situation and dangerous situation. And at that point, I was estranged from my family. So by the summer of 2012, I have no contact with my family or friends. I'm kind of hanging on to dear life. Like, I'm surprised at that point I'm still going, because it was a critical decision. I remember when I started shooting heroin, I was like, that's never okay, but it's working. I don't have to feel anything. I have to feel shit.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in my bathroom in my little apartment, and I looked at my pistol at that time, and I looked at a loaded syringe, and I'm like, tears coming to my face. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm like, fuck it. I'm just going to keep shooting dope until the lights go out. And sure enough, that's what I ended up getting November 12th, 2012, just short of 10 years ago. This Saturday will be my 10-year anniversary of being clean and sober. And what's important is that in that summer, my old man kind of circled around and was like, look, like, I don't know exactly what you're doing or where you're at or what is going on, but whatever it is, it's bad. And you're going to end up, going to prison, killing somebody or killing yourself out here. Well, he was right? Because shortly after that, a few months later, I would overdose in just outside of North Newark in Belleville, New Jersey. And then at 9-something that morning, I would wake up and look to a doctor and a nurse and be like, hey, who are you guys? Right. And look down and be naked and just have my socks on. I laugh about that with some humor because that's truly, truly where I feel like I actually started to live for the first time ever. It doesn't discredit or dismiss the experiences before that. They're all formative and all important. But the worst day of my life, right? And now, mind you, combat had some horrific experiences in it, right? But the worst day of my life, where I nearly died of a fatal overdose, and then had a ton of legal charges as a result of that as well, because the amount of drugs I had on me and a bunch of other things, kicked off, in my estimation, the best thing that could have ever happened to me, and it actually was the opportunity for me to start learning how to live.
Right. And this whole time, or not the whole time, but for a significant period of time, it would seem, is that you're still in the military, doing your job and doing all that kind of stuff, but also dealing with like so much shit on the other side of your life. Like, did you start to also see, and maybe you were just even unaware of it, like those like outside things infiltrating kind of like your career and like how you were able to actually perform your job? Or is it kind of just like almost like robotic, like this is what I do, this is what I know, we're gonna do it?
No, I didn't care one way or the other because I didn't care about anyone or anything. I didn't care about my career. I didn't care about my life. I didn't care about anybody else. I wasn't loyal to anyone else. I wasn't a friend to Vince. I was essentially a good dude that just didn't know how to be good anymore. If I ever knew at that point, I just didn't know how to be guided by my intuition and my natural state of being loving, peaceful, conscious, radiant, wise, and living in grace. I didn't even know that those things existed inside of me because I never had to. I could lie, cheat, and steal my way through anything and everything any given day. And that didn't just start with the drugs, man. That shit went back to when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like manipulative, coercive, and just not a good version. What's interesting in that is that I believe I possess redeemable qualities, right? Because there are guys that I served with, right? There's some that jetted as soon as they saw what was happening and they heard what was happening, they jetted. And a handful of guys, man, doubled down and made a bet on me. And one of my buddies, I will share, he shared on the record in a legal proceeding, he said to the person that was trying to assassinate my character, he said, "Hey, like, you've never done any of that." He's like, "I have sons." He's like, "There's nobody else in the world I would want to lead my sons into combat." And so this is post, like, as my life's starting to pick back up and come back together. Those were the moments that kind of imprinted on me of like why it was important to get better. So I overdosed and then I ended up in a psychiatric hospital for 93 days because it was kind of literally like, "Hey, dude, you're going to go sit in Essex County Jail or you can go down to this treatment center. And we're just giving you a pass because you're a veteran. And we're in Essex County. We have bigger problems than some junkie strung out on our streets." Right. So that's what happened. And that 93 days in the inpatient hospital was the first time I had to acknowledge that post-traumatic stress was a thing in my life. And that was much more shattering and crushing than anything else because I thought it was for the weak. I thought it was for the fucking pussies. I thought it was for people that were incapable and inept. And that was all the lies that Vince needed to tell Vince to keep doing the bullshit Vince was doing.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I got better. I went to an outpatient program in the Warrior Transition Unit. And then yeah, me and the Army broke up. They gave me my paperwork. I turned in my equipment. And then in that supply cage, I was turning my stuff in. My wife was a supply sergeant. I took her with me. And that was it. Yeah. It was a fair trade. It was a fair trade. So,
yeah,
you know, what's cool post-service, right? Me, you know, my wife, you know, she's a veteran as well, going through her stuff. And she felt, I won't get into her details. She faced some difficulties as well. And apparently there was a fight at our house at that time and some dude died or some terrible thing happened. She ended up in litigation, these crazy lawsuits and a really, really difficult time. So we're at dinner and we're getting to know each other. It's our first like date. She shares that with me all stressed out and upset. And I'm just happy to be alive. And I'm like, "I died 6 months ago." and she looks at me and goes like, "Oh yeah, whatever," and then goes back to tell her story. And then like shortly after that she realized, she's like, "Hey, were you like serious about that?" And so because I felt like it was better and safer for me to disclose where I was at in my life, right? I wasn't on stable footing at that point. I had blown through my life savings. I owed the IRS a shit ton of money. I was in the hole, a whole bunch of money to a whole bunch of credit companies. I think I even had a loan with like an Indian reservation out west somewhere, right, that I wasn't going to pay. And so all those things were going on in my life, right? All those things were happening, right? And I'm like, I just got to stay clean and sober right now, man. And I have to get away from military people. Now think about that, right? Because it was a culture, it's insulated. And it's not that it's a good or it's a bad thing. It's like the guys that I was connected to, like part of the deal was like, drink, tie one on, go out on the weekends, every Friday after duty. Hey man, let's go back to the team room, grab a drink, whatever, right? Like, and I was like, yeah, the difference for me and them is like, all right, dude, it's 1800. I'm gonna go home and see my wife and kids. 1800. Dude, we're just getting started here, man, right? I'll be back for PT tomorrow, right? And so that behavior, that emotional response, that positive emotional response I have to alcohol and or drugs was something that I had to like completely remove myself environmentally and go forward. And I got a lot of help, a lot of therapy. I received a lot of treatment. I was gifted a lot of second chances. And for me, those were those moments I got some real feedback about like, okay, maybe I want to do this next. But there were pieces to pick up and put together to go forward. And I can't say that I've made amends on everything at this point because there was a lot of damage done in a very short period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Bill, I don't know if you had anything that you just wanted to jump in with. I know we're steamrolling this conversation. We haven't heard from you since the very beginning, but or we can just keep going, you know.
Keep going.
All right,
Keep
cool.
going, dude.
So, all right,
Keep
cool.
going, dude.
This is the best co-host I've ever had on this show. So, all right, what I think is also interesting, this whole fucking story is interesting. But the thing that I have a question about now is the fact that, like, obviously, like you had mentioned the PTSD thing, and also having now to get clean and sober at the exact same time, which to me is like two really hard things that you have to deal with all at the same time, when easily, like, the obvious one is like you could just fill that gap, you know, the old school way, the old Vince way, really easily. So maybe take me through like that progression, and how, if it was difficult from the early state. I mean, obviously it's difficult, it's a stupid way to say it, but the kind of the fortitude that it takes to kind of go through the PTSD thing, acknowledge it, like you said, but then also find healthy ways to go about improving that and addressing that.
Yeah. So those are the behavioral changes that have to take place over time. And that's the really hard part, right? And so the first part was I just received really good clinical care, right? Somebody that led me in that deep intensive process and allowed me to shape and tell my story that is an accurate and precise reflection of my lived experience, right? And what's important in that is post-traumatic stress is tricky, right? And the memory isn't as accurate or good as we think it is in any given day, especially when we're recalling traumatic or difficult things. So we'll try to chunk the information and or forget the information or reframe the memory. So that was the first part of it. I had to be able to tell my story in an accurate, precise way in terms of what actually was traumatic. Right. And so here's the deal, Mike, I'll be candid with you. I'm very comfortable saying this and sharing it for record. Killing the enemy was never, ever it. Like a 500-pound bomb got dropped on where we were getting shot at from. Like, I'm Super Bowl cheering. Like, that's how it works, right? You're there to do a job. That's part of the deal. Now, when guys that were wearing our uniform were hurt, those memories are emblazoned in my mind, hurt or killed, right? Like those are in there, and we I don't think we ever forget those, right? But being able to accurately tell those stories was the first part. Second part is then identifying what are my behaviors or my triggers, right, that create that response, that fight or flight. Or freeze in some cases. And for me, I default to fight and aggression, right? That is it, right? Hyper vigilant at all times, forward and projection into the future, because my lived experiences tell me that the future can be much worse than the current state of affairs if I don't do anything. Right. And so,
Right.
so working and doing that work to start healing, it had to only come after. And this I want to be clear on. There's two different schools of thought here. For me, I had to get clean and sober and get a little bit of sobriety before we could take the deep dive into the trauma.
Yeah.
Right. Because I didn't have the requisite skill sets. If something would have come up to the surface and I wasn't ready for it, that would have been good enough reason for me to AMA out of the treatment facility and go on the run. Right. Like that would have been enough. So I was very fortunate with the treatment team that treated me. So once there was a few weeks of sobriety, that's where I could start opening up and talking. And what was really important is I went to a military treatment facility. I'm in the group and my arms are folded and I'm closed off and I'm shut down. And I hear a kid from Fort Bragg, I shouldn't say kid, a young man. He starts sharing his story, his trauma story, and the behaviors that he's taken on and things that he's done and been through. Now, mind you, he's like 30, 45 days ahead of where I'm at. And I'm like, holy shit, like that's my story. Like this dude is saying, like, there's nothing unique under the sun that I experience when it comes to the trauma that related to the combat. And for me, that was validation, and it pulled me into the group. And at that point, I could start to put my guard down and start to open up and share a little bit. That was the first time in that hospital was the first time I laughed, probably in like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
In the loony bin.
Right.
Hysterical laughing. And because at that point, it was the first time I was able to get in touch with some of the emotions and things that I go in. I was also able to cry for the first time in a good 4 or 5 years. So there was a lot of physical and visceral things that had to happen in that space for me to even have the opportunity to start getting better. There was a lot of luck. It wasn't just because Vince has the fortitude and the toughness for it. It's actually quite the opposite. It was having the willingness to allow somebody to give me a hug if I needed one, and to allow somebody to put their boot up my butt if I needed that as well.
Right.
So,
you know, what's funny is like, yeah, we've had different people talk about a lot of different things on this show. And, you know, like we've done some different things like in mental health type conversations over the lifespan of this show and other shows that I've been a part of in my career doing this. And what I always find interesting is like the story that you're telling us candidly is like, it's a fucked up story. Like it's pretty crazy up to and including this point in your life. But it's like you mentioning the fact that like you hear someone else telling their story and you're like, wow, that's me. And I think a lot of times you go through life thinking like, well, I'm the only one going through this shit right now. So like no one else can understand, no one else can help me, anything like that. And it just takes like one person. And that's why I like sharing like these kinds of stories and kind of getting a little bit deeper because, you know, like I do not have the same life experience as you. I don't. I can't relate. It's like a totally different way for me to kind of like interact, but I've gone through different things in my life that have affected me and gone through different mental health things and struggles and whatever. But then hearing other people tell those stories like that are similar to mine, I'm like, oh shit, like maybe this isn't that bad. Maybe like I can, if they can get through it, maybe like I can too. So like I really appreciate you sharing like all this so far.
Sure.
One of the other things that I think is also I'm curious about is I keep saying one of these things, but it's like I'm just curious about a lot. But one of them happens to be this following thing. So basically, it seems as though, and I think you mentioned this earlier, that over basically your entire life up to and including this point and getting clean and sober and then going through the stuff to tackle the PTSD stuff is the idea that like you didn't give a shit about anybody else, including yourself. And you're how old at this point?
32.
32. So I'm 32. So you're basically gone through like my entire life, not really giving a shit about really anybody. But now you're in a position where you're going through this process of getting clean and sober and the PTSD, and you can't do that stuff on your own. So was there also like a level of trying to like learn how to trust the people that were actually going to help you through this process? Was that difficult, or was it just kind of like a surrendering because like Vince can't do this on his own anymore? Like I need somebody. I need a support system. I need backup, whatever it is.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. I think that's a good way of saying it is surrendering. Though I don't use that language in my own practice, and I don't actually use that word at all. I just refer to it as attack in a different direction, right? And I know it just sounds just like words, right? Yeah. They have meaning. They matter quite a bit, right? And so we have to consider culture, mindset, and global perspective, right? I say that to say this is that the help that I received in the beginning was that of necessity. And then what naturally happened, because I had a good experience, is it allowed me to respect myself enough to ask other people for help. I didn't respect myself at that point. So let alone trust, forget about trust. I just had to respect Vince. I had to respect the person across from me at any given time that was trying to offer what they were offering. And then I could confirm or deny whether that was going to be of any value to me or not. Right. So I'll give you an example with that. Hey, Vince, I think when you get out of the hospital, I think you need to consider going to 90 meetings in 90 days in either Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. Right. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm desperate though. So I start going to the meetings. Right. And, you know, around day 45, I've made like 45 meetings in a row. And I turned to him. I'm like, yeah, I don't know really what I'm getting there or not. And he's like, when's the last time you did something 45 days in a row? I used to shoot smack every single day, right? Like clockwork. And he was like, yeah, that's the confidence you kind of need to build, right? Is that just to go do something, right? Regardless of what you feel, and just continue to do that. And I think that was the first boost of confidence I got. And that was coming from a total stranger, just a guy I knew through the rooms, right? He had no necessary connection to me. He wasn't my sponsor. It was just a dude offering a perspective to another dude that had been there, right? So, you know, he's 10 years clean or whatever, just saying, hey, just keep making the meeting and see what happens. And so at that point, he's coaching me up. And this is the informal self-help side of it, right? He's like, yeah, just come up with a plan, man. Like if this doesn't work out, you don't like what's happening, make some changes. And so at that point, I made a deal with myself. At the end of 2013, if things don't work out, whatever money I had, I was just going to go buy all the coke and crack and heroin I can, find the biggest syringe I can, and just fucking rock out and get back to it. And fortunately, in that window of time when I did the 90 meetings in 90 days is when I met my wife. And man, that just accelerated the process because I think she was going through her process. I was going through mine, and that mutually supportive process, right? That's important too. Environmental factors and the people you're around that will allow and encourage somebody to heal and get better. And that's a tricky part of it as well is sometimes creating a pseudo family beyond your own biological family is a really, really important part of healing from trauma and recovering from drugs and alcohol. And I would submit to you, and what I do for a living at this point, that might be the most difficult thing for a human being to do, at least in Western culture, is reshape how you define and describe what your family is to you. Because just because they birthed you or helped make you, or you were raised around them in the same house, it doesn't mean that they have your best interests as you grow into this life. So yeah, a little lecture-y, right? But that I find is very difficult for people to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill, did you have something? I saw you were. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just, as always, Vince, appreciate the honesty and the openness.
Yeah,
and it's one of those things that's super challenging. Because we're really good at putting ourselves in positions where we think we're alone. We isolate, and it's just like all about me. And in many ways, the remedy and the medicine is connection, and is, co-regulating with other people and support. And it doesn't necessarily mean a one-to-one linkage, but that work of finding others who do have not your best interest in mind, but that actually have that way of viewing you as someone who's worthy of learning how to maybe love themselves a little bit, and they're extending you that gift and that grace and that love. That's the work. Finding other people who can help you because we can't get through this shit on our own. Yeah. And, that's something within the veteran community, both in and out, active duty, reserve guards, whatever, and out. Nobody's doing this alone. Absolutely no one. But the things that we do that lead us to the places where we are alone are so fucking easy to do, and they work really, really well. But as a community, as a shift, to have and whatever it might be, for some people, it might be, like Vince said, he needed to get away from military people. And that might be what you need to do.
Yeah.
Other people, it might be shooting. It might be, doing some of the tactical stuff, like whatever it might be. Where are people gathering that have this productive and positive worldview? And how are they, and where are they coming together? And how can you, be part of that and just let that work? The dude who shared his trauma narrative, who was like 30 or 45 days ahead of you, Vince, do you ever link back up with him? Did you tell him? Was it just a serendipitous?
Never shared with him, followed up anything. We weren't particularly close, right? We didn't have much in common, right? He was a senior NCO and staff sergeant, right? So like it was him being authentic, right? And real about, hey, dude, this scared me and I'm leading 140 kids, right? Like this was a difficult situation, right? And like the things he was doing to work through that, right? And how he talked about his sobriety. It was just planting seeds in my mind that had to kind of just get in there, right? Not all of them were going to harvest, right? But some started to harvest. Bill, I want to add something too, because relating off of being around the right kind of people is incredibly important. I do think there's irony, right? And like when we sign up for the military, we essentially are making a promise to never be alone again, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're making a commitment to at least one other person for the duration of our career, with exception, right? There's onesie, twosie people that do things individually in the Army, but there's not many of them, right? Generally speaking, you are working directly with a team and being supported by a team. And it's kind of ironic on the backside, all the problems, issues, and dilemmas go against that promise. Talk about breaking a promise, right? Like, and so folks want to like throw words around and be like, oh, like I'm loyal to this and thin line of that, and I pledge allegiance to this, that, and apple pie democracy, whatever. It's like, how about you be loyal to yourself, man? by supporting other people, right, and allowing them just to express what they express. And I think that's kind of what I got from treatment and hearing different people's stories is like everybody's going to heal differently. Mm-hmm. Everybody's trauma has a different impact on them. So just start at the top of the list, right? Like, all right, Jim, that doesn't work. All right, I like shooting. That doesn't work. Hey, I need additional medication. All right, medication's going to be it. Hey, I need this treatment. And you start running down the list. Right. And for me professionally now, the other side of it is if somebody comes to me and they say, hey, Vince, I'm struggling with suicidal ideation. I'm struggling with drugs and alcohol. And I just reflect back to them, right? I don't know them, don't have rapport. I'm like, man, I'm just grateful that you're doing that. Like you're struggling with it. You're aware of it. And that's a good deal because we can talk about that. Mm-hmm. So are you okay if we make an appointment for next week? No, I'm not telling them to change anything at that point. I'm like, hey, let's just talk about that. Let's explore what that is in your life, whether it's a veteran and or a civilian, right? Because to Mike's point, yeah, we have different experiences, but dude, human beings, you live long enough in the rock, you're going to go through some shit because we don't know who's driving the spaceship. We have no idea who's driving the spaceship Earth, man. You know what I mean? So we're all going to hit some bumps and bruises in this place, and things will hurt and they will make us cry. Right. And then the question becomes, are you crying to keep going or are you crying to give up, man? And that's the part that our population, our brothers and sisters, they don't necessarily always want to hear, man. But if you can follow it up with a hug, typically I find that most guys and gals will come back to continue the conversation. Right. And so building rapport, right? Essentially what I learned to do in the friggin' army, right, really well, is exactly how I go about doing therapy, right? Just build rapport first. Because you're not going to overthrow or build up a government until you build rapport. It's just not going to happen, right? And so with my clients, whether it's individually or on a collective, that is how I do it. Because to your point, Bill, it's just about facilitating the right people and connecting the right people. And sometimes people don't want to be connected, you know, and that's a part that I think some folks struggle with. It's like, hey, dude, you're struggling with homelessness. Cool, man. You're gonna make your appointment next week. Dude, just come back. And that's a community mental health thing, right? Serving folks that are struggling with things of that nature. But sometimes that's a conversation because you have the right to be homeless.
Yeah.
You got the right to keep doing all of those things. But I think that's part of the conversation too, is that like nobody has it figured out. And I think just continuing the conversation for me, and I think, Bill, we've worked together enough and served enough people together to realize like sometimes you just need to continue the conversation. You're not going to solve it in therapy. You're not going to solve it with one particular thing. There's no magic bullet. It's just keep having the conversation. Just keep having
and the wonderful part about it, I think, with like, you know, what's a remedy, a potential remedy, maybe not the remedy, but one of the things that would come to the surface as like, oh, there's something here, you know, this notion of just find others, whatever it is, wherever they are, just find others. And what that dude did to you by just sharing. And now, yeah, okay, got it. It was in a treatment center, which good, they're doing their job, like creating an environment where that can go. But you have no idea. You have no fucking idea. It's not like, hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm Sergeant First Class Jones. I'm going to do this, that, the other. Here's my recipe. That invitation, it's not even the authentic approach to living. Not the like forced authentic, so making it more than it is kind of deal, but like we just have no idea. And that's where I think, Mike, you know, kind of what you're doing here too for the veteran community, for the local New Jersey veteran community too, is like, yeah, you know, like there's so much value in sharing the story.
Right.
Because somebody's going to listen.
Yep.
Somebody has listened to whatever, you know, this, that, the other, that you have no idea. Like you have no idea what someone's going to hear and take out of that and be like, if you can strike a match in the darkness, you can see a shitload. We don't need to turn the spotlight on. All we need to do is strike a match.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what we do when we do come together, when we do share, and when it's real, when it's imperfect, when it's just, yeah, your authentic, you know, story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Incredibly messy work, but incredibly important work, Mike. And I'm really grateful for what you're doing here, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a few minutes left. Are you guys okay if we go a couple minutes past 2? Is that cool?
I'm good.
All right.
I'm good on this time.
So I do want to make sure that we kind of like not finish up the story, but at least kind of like fill this last little gap that we have here. So you go through your treatment. You said like there were certain pivotal moments that we've already kind of talked about that have helped accelerate that, like the comeback, basically. And was there a moment at a certain point? Was there a moment after like you felt like you were? I'm going to put this in air quotes because I don't know if this is ever, maybe not something that you ever really felt, but like normal, like a normal life, like you were kind of able to kind of now operate as a member of society in a way that like, you know, now you're doing what you're doing now. Was there like a shift, or I'm sure it was like over time and may even still now be a process, but was there a moment where now you were like, all right, now I can go into society and do what I need to do to for me or whatever?
I think it was a bunch of little things, to your point, over time. It was on a continuation or a continuum as I sought that, though. And here's what I saw. To your point, you asked about like the the tenacity or fortitude. I think you said something like that. I think that is kind of the gift, right? And curse for me is perseverance and just being too stubborn to quit, right? And I was like, all right, like I'm gonna recover, and I don't know what I'm doing here, and I'm gonna get really smart on it and start figuring those things out. And part of that process, as the years have gone on, right, is like 2014, I started undergraduate, right? And my first professor, super important moment, another critical moment, Dr. Lem Burnham. He was a Vietnam veteran, played in the NFL, does amazing work. He pulls me aside after class, right? Because I'm doing my Billy Madison thing. And he's like, hey, dude, he's like, great, man, you served, I served, whatever. He's like, nobody cares here. Right. And I was like, wow, that's exactly what I needed. I needed somebody to challenge me and push back. He would write back like 5 pages on like a 3-page paper. And I was out of love. Right. And I would get frustrated. But he was like, hey, your mind isn't open or yet. He's like, we need to open that thing. And you need to start molding it so you can think more clear and better about how you're thinking. So 2014, I get through undergrad and things are starting to come together for my now wife, Mary, and I. And she's back in school now. Right. She's like, I think I want to teach. Right. And I'm like, all right, cool. I think I want to practice therapy. And so we're kind of both starting grad school at the same time. And grad school was a moment where like day one, I walked in there. I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. I opted not to do the MBA thing. I was like, yeah, I can do business, but I don't really want to do that. Like, I think I want to develop a skill to add value to my community. Right. And day one, I was like, hey, I'm gonna help like 10,000 people, and this I'm gonna do it, blah 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 blah. And like the class is hysterical, like dying laughing, the professor's laughing, and I'm like, what? I'm like, oh, that's good because nobody else has that goal, so that's a good start, right?
Yeah.
But by the end of that program, for me, that developing those skills and going on in, at that point, I had been interning, I started working per diem, I was in front of clients at that point, and I just knew, like when I walked in there, I was like, oh man, this is it. Like, I'm really, really good at this because of all of the bullshit that has either happened to me or, more importantly, all the bullshit I've created in my life. Childhood trauma, trauma from combat, divorce, right? Financial ruin, right? Homelessness, and like suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, drug addiction, overdose, legal issues, right? Like run down the laundry list of whatever that is. I have a frame of reference. Not that my clients even know that shit, right? Generally, right? I don't disclose it. I don't bring it up and don't compare or contrast. But it was like, man, now I also have the skills to help other people sort through their stuff, right? And 2017, 2018, to answer your question, is kind of when it happened. And flash forward 2018, right? 6 years later from my dad was like, hey, you're going to die in the street or go to prison. When I graduated, he pulled me aside. Like, I just crushed that program and I crushed undergrad. And he was like, damn, he's like, I would have bet a sum of money that would have hurt me, that you would have not made it past 33. There's no way. And the fact that you're here now, and this is my father saying this to me, and I'm very proud of this, man. We have a great relationship these days. He's like, I don't think I would bet against you to do anything. He's like, because you've gone literally from the bottom. Like, the only thing that could have happened that would have made things much more difficult is I would have been incarcerated in like a state institution for a longer period of time. That would have delayed it. But here's the deal. Like, in my mind, I would have just done my time and come out, and I would just be a couple of years behind the curve in terms of where I'm at, because I had already made my mind up of what I was going to do next. So 2018 happens. I'd linked up with Bill at that point. I'm doing some of that deep work in a different way. Like, I'm going in the right trajectory, but Bill in between the years is like, poof, right? Like helping another veteran, and this is my work, and it's mutually supportive in many ways. And then 2019, I was selected to attend the Stand 2 Veteran Leadership Program at the Bush Center in Dallas. And that was pretty world-class, right? President Bush and his cabinet secretaries are teaching the classes, right? I'm not going to get a better education than that as far as formal education necessarily. And then I started my doctorate program, and I defended my dissertation last week. I don't say that to be like, look at Vince now. I say that to say this. The same basic skills that I had to use to recover from post-traumatic stress and addiction are the same exact skills that I used to get through a dissertation. And it sounds like this. No matter how I feel or what's going on in my life, I'm going to give attention to this for 1 hour a day, and just do that every day for however long it goes until it ends. And that's not sexy. Nobody wants to hear that shit, right? Because they're like, oh, where's the fancy Instagram posts of me giving myself a water cooler blowjob? Doesn't work that way. It's waking up at 04:30 because I have no time in my schedule to read a bunch of journal articles or write a sentence when I have no energy left at 10 o'clock at night. That's how it happens. I'm very aware that I have an IQ of 118. The Army told me that multiple times, right? And they said, hey, dude, you're slightly above average intelligence, but other than that, you're pretty average, and if not mediocre in many ways, right? So I know the degree of intensity and work that is required to do so to make fundamental life change. I don't force that onto my clients, but I just use it as a beacon of strength and hope, because clients are nosy and they do the Insta, Face, Google search. They know who and what you are.
Yeah.
but it also allows for us to accelerate the rapport building process and to do some of that deep, meaningful work. And that's what I love to do, right? And kind of expanding out the horizons and the baseline. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. I'm going to fail a lot going forward. But as far as practicing therapy, 2017, 2018 is kind of when I knew that's my calling. I'm going to do that till they put me in the ground. Lord willing, I'll be 99 years old at my desk, hopefully doing that.
Yeah.
That's like my lifeblood in terms of what I do. But then there's a whole bunch of other initiatives and things I'll do over the next however long, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? Like, truthfully, full disclosure, if anybody makes it this far, and not that it matters, I want to be like the rich guy that nobody knows, right? And not for the sake of being rich, but like for the sake of being able to help more people, right? Like, I don't know, whatever that means, right? Like, because that is part of it too. And it takes resources and access and skills and connections to be able to leverage those things. And I feel like I'm in my infancy. I don't even feel like I've scratched the surface as far as developing those skills and relationships to do that. And and I think, anybody that's like, oh, you're 42. And I'm like, yeah, I'm 42. I CrossFit 5 days a week. I'm super fit. I don't plan on falling off the face of the earth anytime soon, because I know that could happen, right? And with that being stated, I've just adopted, and I've had that mindset since the military. The future could always be worse than the current state of affairs, no matter what. No matter what. And with that worldview of pragmatism, for me, I find that it helps me to lead with an open heart, and be supportive of other people, even when it's not fun or sexy to do so. I had a buddy that was facing 30 years in prison, right? And every day showing up at the trial, helping him go through that and get through that. And he was like, thanks, buddy. I didn't think you would be here or around when this was all happening. And I was like, dude, like, we did much more dangerous stuff in the world than this right here. And it's not a sexy time to show up, but you definitely showed up in my life when shit was a disaster. And I'm a deeply loyal person. So as much as I was selfish and didn't give a shit about anybody, I'm extremely loyal and hold strong convictions. And I'm an all-in kind of guy. I'm not I don't have it in me to call Bill and talk about the weather. It's going to be about, hey, mental health initiatives. How are we helping people, growing, learning? I just don't give a shit about the weather in Far Hills, right? But I do give a shit about Bill and Kay because, right, they have been incredibly generous to Mary and I as role models, as coaches, mentors. And I have friends. I mean, we're friends at this point now, but like, them giving us access and making us privy to what they're doing has informed and inspired to a great degree what Mary and I do with H-Hour, and with all the forms and fashions and how that's manifested with the training, the events, the professional development, continuing education, and then again with my private practice. It's just be around good people, man, and you'll start to be that person. Be around, Jim Rohn figured it out, right? Be around those 5 folks. You're gonna be the average of them, something, whatever, right? And for me, that's part of my recovery process. It's part of my growth process. I very rarely will put myself in a room where I am the smartest or the most fit or the most well off or any of that. I will always seek rooms where it's other people, and then I confirm or deny what works or doesn't work for me, and just give credit where credit is due, because I have zero original or unique thoughts, man. Like, I'm a right click king. I right click the shit out of everything and drag it over to my screen, and then I just kind of mold it around to make it Vince's. But I will always give credit, man, and that's why I think this is here. And Mike, I give credit to you for forming this and allowing folks like myself to just share a little bit of story. Hopefully, it hustles and inspires a little bit of hope for somebody, either through influence, motivation, a little bit of individual consideration. But if somebody ever wants to reach out, they can reach out, and if they're not ready to reach out, that's okay too. Just keep having the hard conversation about, hey, I'm struggling. I know I'm struggling. I'm just not ready to do something about it. But just keep having the conversation, right? Because if you live long enough, you may give yourself the gift and the opportunity to have a day of sobriety.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming on and sharing the story and everything. And if people do want to reach out to you or learn a little bit more about you or whatever, where are some places that they can go to do that?
Instagram is Vincent_Americo. And then best email would be vince@thehour.com.
Awesome. All right. So I'll make sure I put those in the show notes so people do want to connect with you and reach out or talk or whatever it is. I'll make sure I do that. Again, really appreciate it. Bill, obviously, thank you for being my co-host again for episode 3 of our New Jersey Veteran Series. I thought we were going to make it through the whole episode without you sharing anything, but you came at the end and you fucking crushed it. It was great.
Listen, any good sidekick
Right.
finds a little wiggle room.
Absolutely.
And just steps in.
Like, you're my Robin. I'm Batman. You're Robin.
I don't mind.
Yeah.
I don't mind.
Where would Batman be without Robin? You know,
I mean, you're
nowhere.
welcome.
Yeah, exactly.
You're welcome.
Awesome. No, this was great, Vince. Like, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today and everything. And I'll make sure I put everything in the show notes. So this has been episode 3 of our New Jersey Veteran series of Greetings from the Garden State. I'm Mike Ham with my co-host Bill Anthes. We were here with Vince Ruiz on this particular episode of our New Jersey Veteran series. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.